Thank you, Shlomo. Our next speaker is Bob Blakley, who's the global head of information security innovation at Citigroup. You know, when Bob sent me his presentation, it was 33 slides. And I gently reminded him that we have an 8-minute time limit here at Rethink Cyber, and asked him if the 33 slides would fit into the 8 minutes. And he said, Yael, the title of my talk is Cybersecurity Grand Strategy. Your question should be whether it will be less than 8 minutes. So without further delay, Bob Blakley.
Thank you, Yael. Because I didn't want her to worry, I added 3. What I want to talk about today is we're very good in the information security industry at tactics. When a new vulnerability is released, we're good at building a new control to defeat that vulnerability. What I'm going to suggest today is that we could get better at thinking about the strategic context in which we deploy our tactics. And the question that we should be thinking about when we're thinking about strategy is, what is the fundamental nature of the struggle that we are involved in, and what would it look like to prevail in that struggle? So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. In the beginning, there was the computer, and the computer was installed in the business, and it started doing interesting things. And pretty quickly, various forms of adversaries discovered that there was a computer in the building, and of course, being adversaries, they attacked the computer. So at that point, we thought, okay, we need to do something about that, and we came up with a plan. And the plan was that we were going to build this big shield, and it was going to be invulnerable, and all of the attacks were going to bounce off of it. And of course, what we discovered after we executed this plan was that after the adversaries studied the shield for a while, they were, in a few instances, able to figure out that, like all human artifacts, the shield was imperfect. And they devised mechanisms for getting through the shield and stealing stuff from us and doing damage. So, my clicker will work. A side effect of this process was that because it didn't really cost very much to attack the shield, essentially the activity of analyzing the shield and developing attacks on it began to exert a selective pressure on the adversary population and to generate a couple of technically extremely proficient adversaries who got really good at breaking controls. And of course, there were still a large population of people who were less good at breaking controls, running around, rattling the doorknobs, but not getting in. Lesson 1 of the plan that we initially implemented was that defeating attacks without actually defeating the attackers breeds these supervillains, the technically extremely proficient adversaries. Because they have a lot of time and resources to study our controls. So another side effect that we didn't discover until a little bit after that was that the existence of these sort of high-functioning adversaries created a market, because these guys are social and they go on the internet and they go into chat rooms and they say, hey, look, I figured out how to break control X. And all of the less proficient adversaries then say, hey, tell you what, I'll pay you $10 if you give me the tool that you used to break that particular control. So, and of course, after the tool is widely distributed, it requires less expertise, and all of the sub-villains can now attack the system. So lesson number 2 is that breeding supervillains creates a secondary market of sub-villains who will pay the supervillains to use the tools that they've developed. And of course, this means that the next thing that we have to do, because now all of a sudden an attack is widely distributed, is we have to build a new control to defeat the new attack. And of course, what happens when we build a new control is that all of the subvillains go back to the supervillain and they say, oh, well, there's this new control. Could you figure out how to break that if we paid you some money? And sometimes, indeed, these technically proficient adversaries are able to do that. And so the secondary market that develops funds an arms race. So this is maybe in a certain sense not a problem if you're selling security tools, but if you're using them, it's a problem because there's a limit to the number of controls that any single organization can deploy and manage. So what I'm going to suggest primarily today is that the struggle that we're involved in is fundamentally not a technical struggle. It is fundamentally an economic struggle. And because defeating attacks without actually defeating the attackers isn't solving the problem, we are going to have to do something else. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to do something economic. We're going to have to make attacks expensive and not just unsuccessful. So how do we do that? Well, there are two different things I think that we need to do because there are two different categories of attackers. The first is we have to drive up the cost of an attack so that the technically proficient adversaries no longer can test their attacks again and again and again for free. And the second thing that we need to do is disrupt the secondary market. And there are a variety of ways that you could do this. So there's a paper by a guy named Akerlof on the market for lemons, which is one approach. But it shouldn't be the case that if you go out onto the internet and you buy an attack tool, it should necessarily be, high quality, grade A prime attack. That's all I had today. I'm sorry I finished 1 minute and 33 seconds early. Next time I'll bring 50 slides.